Hey guys, tonight we travel back in time to the misty woodlands and fading twilight of early 19th century Tennessee. Here in the quiet folds of the American frontier, beneath trees that creak softly in the wind and beside fields that stretch into stillness, a family once tried to live simply. But something in those woods had other plans. A whisper, a knock, a presence. Something began to answer back when no one was speaking. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is cool and earthy as dusk settles over the Bell family homestead in Robertson County. The smoke from the hearth curls gently up through the stone chimney, catching the last orange light of day. Inside the log cabin, John Bell wipes his hands on a cloth and stands slowly from the worn table, his legs stiff from a long day walking the property line. He's 51, sturdy, with a thick beard and eyes that carry more weight than he lets on. His wife Lucy hums softly at the hearth, stirring a pot of beans. Their children shuffle about with the quiet rhythm of early autumn chores. It's 1817, and though the nearest neighbor is a good half-mile down the road, the Bells are not isolated. Not really. The land speaks through rustling branches, through the occasional distant bay of a hound, and lately, through something else. It began a week ago with small sounds. Nothing dramatic. Just the tapping of wood against the wall outside at night. Then the thump of footsteps on the porch, measured steady, but no one ever there. Then came the whispering. Faint, unintelligible, always just outside the edge of hearing. John had checked, walked the perimeter by lantern light, called into the night with musket in hand. Nothing. That night, as the family settled for sleep, the air inside the cabin grew strangely heavy. Not cold, just thick. Lucy extinguished the lanterns and climbed into bed beside her husband. The silence of the house closed in like a held breath. In the children's room, 14-year-old Betsy Bell pulled the blanket to her chin and stared at the ceiling beams overhead. Her younger brother Richard already slept, his breath slow and even. But Betsy lay stiff. Then the sound returned. Knocking, 3 sharp raps against the far wall. Then silence. Then a soft scraping fingernails against the wooden floor near the hearth. She sat up. "Papa," she called out softly. No answer. She rose, padded barefoot through the house, the floor cool against her skin. The front door was still bolted. The windows shuttered. And then from behind her a breath. Warm, close, not hers. She turned. No one. She backed away slowly, eyes wide, and returned to bed without waking her brothers. The next morning, John found the scratch marks along the side of the cabin. Long, shallow, like claws. Not deep enough to pierce the wood, just enough to mark. They didn't speak of it much. By the 4th night, the sounds grew bolder. Rattling chains in the hallway, the creak of footsteps on stairs that didn't exist, voices murmuring in corners that weren't there. Betsy's hair was pulled by invisible hands. Richard's blanket was torn from the bed. Each time, nothing seen, but something felt. A presence, observant, mocking. Neighbors began to hear about it. Some laughed, others listened. Word traveled to James Johnston, a family friend known for his faith and quiet steadiness. He visited that Friday evening, shared supper with the Bells, and offered to stay the night. "It'll be a raccoon," he said with a smile. "Or maybe just the wind playing tricks." John didn't argue. That night, Johnston bedded down near the hearth, wrapped in a wool blanket, his Bible resting beneath his hand. At midnight, the knocking began. Slow, rhythmic, not at the door, from within the walls. Then the blanket was yanked from his body in a single motion. He sat up, startled, heart pounding. The fire still burned low, the room empty, but a voice clear and high spoke from the darkness. "There now, friend, do you believe me?" Johnston left at dawn, said nothing. but never returned, and the house was no longer quiet. By the following week, the Bell house no longer slept. The nights stretched long and taut, every shadow holding its breath. The knocking came earlier, the voices louder. Betsy's hair was pulled so often, she took to braiding it tightly before bed, yet still awoke with tangles her scalp tender. Chairs moved on their own. Candles blew out without breeze. The sound of something dragging across the attic floor, slow, deliberate, became a nightly ritual. John Bell grew withdrawn. He stood longer at the edge of his property, eyes on the tree line, silent. His musket always closed, his voice quieter than before. Lucy watched him from the porch, her hands wringing cloth as if she could smooth this unseen thing from their lives. One morning, the family awoke to find muddy footprints across the cabin floor, bare human and leading nowhere. No door opened, no windows broken, just tracks that began at the hearth and vanished near the wall. Neighbors came more often now, some curious, some afraid, some hungry for proof. A few claimed to hear the sounds themselves, whispers, scratching a soft humming near the rafters. One guest, a traveling minister named Powell, suggested a blessing. He sprinkled holy water in each corner of the house, spoke gentle prayers. The air shifted. That night the sounds grew violent. The walls shuddered, the beams groaned, and something screamed from the attic. A voice not human, not animal, a sound too wide to fit inside one mouth. Powell fled. Betsy fell ill soon after, her skin pale, appetite gone. She complained of a pressure in her chest, like someone was sitting on her while she slept. Bruises bloomed on her arms, faint at first, then darker. Lucy wept quietly as she dabbed them with cool cloths. John said nothing. The voice began addressing him directly. Late at night, while he sat at the table trying to read scripture, it whispered near his ear, "Old Jack Bell, you're mine." Only John could hear it at first. Then one night Lucy heard it too. Clear as a bell in the empty room beside her, she sees now. Doesn't she? She froze, didn't turn her head, didn't breathe. The sound of laughter followed. High, childlike, mocking. By then, the presence no longer waited for dark. It knocked during breakfast, moved objects at midday. It opened the back door, then closed it gently as if to say, "I come and go as I please." Betsy began speaking to it, not by choice. She'd sit still in the parlor, face slack, and murmur replies to an unheard voice. Her eyes unfocused, her tone flat. Lucy once placed her hand on her daughter's arm during one of these episodes. Betsy turned her head slowly and said in a voice that did not belong to her, she shouldn't interrupt, then blinked, confused, unaware of what she'd said. Lucy backed away. The family stopped asking questions. By the end of October, the land itself began to change. Crops withered at their edges. The animals grew nervous. Horses refused to be tied near the barn. The dogs barked at empty corners and whimpered at unseen things. And always that voice. Never the same twice. Sometimes sweet, sometimes cold. Sometimes speaking scripture. Sometimes singing nursery rhymes. But always watching, always close. The Bell family had become a story now, one told in quiet voices in neighboring farms by candlelight behind locked doors. And whatever lived with them had learned the shape of their fear and started calling it by name. Winter approached slowly that year, the air sharpening day by day, the wind curling with strange voices if one listened too long. The Bell cabin, once filled with warmth and laughter, now held its breath between every creak of the floor. The firewood snapped differently in the hearth, too loud, too sudden, as if reacting to more than heat. Lucy Bell moved through her routines like someone walking through glass, careful and quiet. Her eyes lingered too long at corners. Her fingers trembled when she laced her apron. And when she prayed, she didn't speak the name of God aloud anymore. Not since the voice began finishing her prayers for her. Betsy's condition worsened. Her dreams became violent. She woke with scratches on her back and the taste of ash in her mouth. Her sleepwalks grew longer. John once found her barefoot in the garden at midnight, standing completely still, arms loose at her sides, eyes open, but unseeing. When he touched her shoulder, she whispered. She said, "I belong to the tree." "What tree?" he asked, voice low, but she didn't answer. She blinked and collapsed into his arms like a doll. The next morning, John walked the edge of the property and found it a hickory tree, old and bent with a hollow in the base. Something had been carved into the bark. Not initials, not words, just a spiral, deep, angry, and damp inside, though it hadn't rained in days. He didn't tell the others. That evening, as he sat sharpening a blade in the barn, the voice returned. Close, intimate. "You're fading, John." Like a page in a wet book. He stood knife in hand, turning. Nothing. Then laughter. Far away, but clear. His laughter, mocking. The livestock refused to go near him for days after that. Elsewhere in the house, the entity grew more talkative. It recited lines from sermons John had delivered in the past, mimicked his children's voices. Sometimes it sang old hymns perfectly, until it twisted the lyrics, inserting words like rot and hollow and bury. One night, while Lucy cooked it, whispered from the rafters. She put salt in the soup now to cover the blood. She dropped the ladle. It hit the floor and rolled to a stop. No one spoke. Betsy sat at the table, hands folded, eyes unfocused. Richard wept quietly, but no one comforted him. They were all afraid to move. Later that week, something new happened. The voice called itself by name. Kate, softly, proudly. "Some call me the witch, but I'm older than that." It didn't explain. It didn't need to. From that night on, Kate spoke with more confidence. She seemed to know everything, what the family said in secret, what neighbors whispered behind closed doors, even the dreams of the children. She commented on visitors before they arrived, greeted them by name, mocked their thoughts before they spoke. The Bell Witch, the neighbors started calling her, with fear and with respect. Some came to witness it. A few brave men stayed overnight. All left before dawn, pale, silent. One described being slapped across the face by an invisible hand. Another claimed something breathed into his mouth while he slept. None returned. And in the Bell cabin, the family began to wither beneath the weight of attention. John's hands grew weak. His speech slurred at times, like his tongue had forgotten how to form words. He refused to eat on certain days, said the food smelled like earth. Lucy's hair lost color in weeks, fading to gray faster than age allowed. Betsy's smile disappeared completely, and still Kate whispered, "There's more to come. She's almost ready. And always, I am not leaving." The cold seeped in deeper than the wood could hold. Wind moaned through the chinks of the Bell house, like a voice stretched too thin, whispering half-formed thoughts into every room. Lucy lined the windows with wool and cloth, but the air remained sharp, unnaturally so. It clung to the children's skin and made the fire feel distant, as if heat were something the house had forgotten how to remember. The lanterns burned low, flickering at odd intervals, like they too were afraid. Kate's presence changed with the weather, more talkative on colder nights, more cruel. She spoke of graves that had no names, of voices buried beneath the tree roots. She told Lucy one evening as she rocked in the parlor, "There's one in the garden now. You just haven't found it yet." Lucy didn't rise. She didn't look outside, but her hands went still in her lap. John's health declined. His limbs ached slow and stiff, but what worried him more was the silence growing in his mind. He began to forget simple words. Faces blurred. He mistook his eldest son for a neighbor long dead, and Kate mocked him for it. "You're fading like dusk, old Jack, one shadow at a time." She never let him sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the knocking began inside his head, behind his eyes, always just beneath thought. Like a heartbeat he couldn't control. The doctor came once. He found no illness, only exhaustion. He prescribed rest, warmth, and prayer. But prayer no longer worked in the Bell home. Every time John tried, the words caught in his throat. Sometimes Kate recited them with him beat for beat. Sometimes she laughed over them louder and louder until his voice vanished entirely. And Betsy, sweet bright Betsy, grew quietest of all. Her hair lost its shine. She no longer joined the others at supper. She sat by the window instead, watching something beyond the trees. Not movement, not light, just a feeling. She said Kate came to her more often now when no one was listening. That Kate whispered to her about futures not yet shaped, of choices that would ruin bloodlines, of a man she was never to marry. Don't love him, Kate had said. If you do, you'll bury him, and he'll curse your name with his last breath. Betsy didn't know who Kate meant, not yet, but she began to dream of a face she hadn't seen. A boy with kind eyes and red hands. One night she awoke with dirt under her nails and a small rock clasped in her palm. She didn't know where it came from. It smelled of iron and cold. She said nothing to her mother, and when she washed her hands, the water ran gray. Visitors kept coming. Some stayed. A few witnessed the witch's voice with their own ears, watched Kate mimic their words, insult their past, or call them by the names of long-dead relatives. One man challenged her, called her a fraud. She replied in his mother's voice, reciting the lullaby he hadn't heard since he was 5. He wept. He left. He never spoke of it again. The town whispered louder now. Some feared the bells had brought something into the land. Others believed they were cursed by their own sins. But most simply avoided the cabin. They crossed the street when passing by. They looked at the ground, because sometimes from the porch you could see Betsy sitting alone, and sometimes if the light caught her just wrong, her shadow didn't match her shape. And sometimes there were two. Snow came late that year, a soft blanket that hushed the land, but did nothing to quiet the house. The Bell cabin stood like a wound in the white, its windows dark, its roof heavy with silence. Inside, the fire snapped gently, but the warmth didn't hold. The walls seemed to breathe in the cold. The voice had grown bold, fully woven into the rhythm of their lives. It no longer whispered, it conversed, argued, mocked, warned. It knew when someone was lying. It knew when someone was afraid. And most of all, it knew when someone was listening. Betsy barely spoke during the day, but at night, she was restless. She sleepwalked often, always toward the fields, always barefoot. John began tying a thin bell to her wrist that would chime if she moved. It rang twice a night, sometimes more. Each time he'd rise and find her standing by the door or facing the hearth, her eyes glazed lips moving soundlessly. He never heard what she said. Lucy no longer lit candles after dark. Shadows stretched differently now. They bent and leaned, and sometimes paused as if watching. She'd caught her own reflection smiling once, even as her face was still. She covered the mirror with linen after that. Kate's laughter had followed. "You're learning," she said. But too late. John grew weaker still. His right eye twitched. His gait turned uneven. He began forgetting entire days. The children took turns reading to him, their voices trembling when the words echoed back, spoken twice, once by them, and once again softer from the empty corner of the room. Then the first true injury. One evening, as Lucy stirred the fire, something struck her across the back, hard. She fell forward, her shoulder bruised deep purple by morning. No one was near her. The room had been still. Kate offered no explanation. Only a song. A sweet, childish melody hummed from inside the walls. The bells prayed again. Not for peace, for escape, but none dared leave the house overnight. One neighbor offered shelter. John agreed, but that night Kate screamed so loud the windows rattled and the neighbor's barn caught fire before dawn. No cause ever found. No offer ever made again. Kate grew especially cruel to Betsy now. She called her by names that made no sense. The hollow bride, the wrong daughter, the one with ash in her mouth. She told Betsy her future in fragments, flashes of death, a wedding veil soaked in blood, a man's hands clawing at earth, and always the tree, the old hickory with its spiral heart. Betsy began drawing it over and over. on scraps of cloth in the soot of the fireplace with sticks in the snow. Always the same spiral. Always the same tree. John found one carving scratched into the bedpost. He burned it. That night, his pillow was soaked in cold water. The next morning, Betsy's fingernails were black. The town kept distance. The whispers grew, and the bells alone now lived inside a story no one wanted to hear, because it wasn't finished, because Kate was still speaking, because the house still listened. The days shortened, folding in on themselves like paper left in rain. The sun rose late, reluctant, and the sky stayed the color of wet stone. Inside the Bell home, silence became more than absence. It became presence. The air held a listening quality, dense and expectant, as if the house itself waited for a misstep. Lucy moved slower now, not from age, but caution. She no longer spoke aloud, unless necessary. Betsy had taken to writing instead of talking, her voice hoarse from nights spent crying into her pillow or whispering back to Kate. The witch had grown more intelligent in her cruelty. She no longer relied on slaps or scratches. Now she planted ideas, doubts, suspicions. She pitted family against family in small, quiet ways. She would mimic John's voice and whisper things to Lucy in the dark. I never wanted another daughter. She looks too much like her. And Lucy, though she knew better, began to feel cracks forming inside her. Once Kate whispered to Betsy, "Your mother dreams of drowning you. It's the only peace left for her." And when Betsy looked at Lucy that morning, her eyes were wide and wet, and she didn't touch her breakfast. John's mind continued to slip. He wandered into the cold barefoot, once muttering about debts unpaid and a tree that wouldn't fall. It took Richard and Joel to bring him back in. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to be walking just behind. He tried to write letters to distant friends, but his hands shook too badly, and the ink bled like veins across the page. Sometimes he called out names no one knew. Sometimes he wept openly, and Kate cooed in response, old Jack's remembering too much, or too little. Poor thing. One morning, Betsy refused to come out of her room. When Lucy entered, she found her daughter curled in a corner, her eyes red, the mirror in the room shattered. Betsy had cut her palm on a shard. She said it had spoken to her, whispered her name, not from the surface, but from the inside. When Lucy gathered the pieces to throw them out, she paused. Each shard showed a different reflection. One looked back with a bruised face. Another with hollow sockets where eyes should be. Another was smiling when Lucy was not. She buried them in the woods. The next night, the dirt in the kitchen floor bulged upward. A single shard of mirror lay on the surface, clean, polished, and showing the old hickory tree. Kate's voice spoke from the ceiling beams, no louder than breath. Some roots go sideways. Some grow into people. That same week, the first outsider to return was Frank Burgess, a young man who had once courted Betsy in town. He came unannounced, bold and brimming with concern. He said he'd heard enough rumors and wanted to see for himself. John, barely lucid, tried to warn him. Lucy said nothing. Betsy only stared. That night, Frank slept in the parlor. He lasted until midnight. Then the house went quiet. Too quiet. No knocking, no voices. Just a thick silence so dense it felt like fog inside the lungs. Then came the scream. Frank's, high raw and animal. He was found in the snow, barefoot, eyes bloodshot, his hands bleeding from clawing at the frozen ground. He would not speak. Not of what he saw, not of what he heard. He only repeated one sentence over and over. There's something under the tree. And Betsy, watching from the window, whispered, I know. The snow deepened. Each morning brought new drifts piling against the cabin walls, muting the world beyond as if nature itself had turned away. No birds sang near the Bell farm now. No tracks in the snow but their own, and sometimes prints that didn't match any shoe or paw. Long, narrow, toeless, like something glided across the earth instead of stepping. Lucy tried to keep the home clean, clinging to routine like a lifeline. She swept the floors, even as dust returned within hours. She boiled water for tea even when it tasted faintly of iron. She hummed hymns under her breath until Kate began humming along same melody, slightly off-key, always from behind. John spent more time in bed body, wasting away, mind flickering in and out like candlelight in wind. Sometimes he spoke in tongues. Sometimes he laughed with a voice that wasn't his. Once he screamed until his throat bled, shouting at something no one could see crouching in the corner. The children didn't go in after that. Betsy's drawings became more disturbing. She no longer sketched the spiral tree. Now it was faces warped eyeless, all bearing her own braid, or her mother's mouth. Some were cut into the wood of her bed frame. One was etched into her skin with a needle just behind her knee where she thought no one would look. She said it kept the voice away for a night. The next day, Kate mocked her for it. "Marks don't ward me off, girl. I taught the markings." Lucy wept in secret now. Her prayers were silent, desperate. She found herself bargaining with God then, with anything that might be listening. Sometimes she'd hear Kate respond in the voice of her own dead mother. "He's not listening, child, but I am." Neighbors stopped visiting altogether. The Bell name became a warning. Children were told not to wander too close. Some men tried to burn the tree. John once found 3 of them with oil and torches. The flames died as if smothered by unseen hands. The next morning, 2 of them had gone mute. The third's hair turned white overnight. None ever spoke of the tree again. Betsy began sleepwalking to it. Each time farther out, even through snow, even barefoot. Lucy started locking the doors, but they found them open by morning, no signs of breaking. Once they found Betsy, kneeling by the tree hands, buried in snow up to her elbows, eyes closed, lips moving. She said she was listening. She said the tree spoke louder than Kate now. John took to muttering about roots, about something buried and something alive. He whispered that the land itself was sick, that Kate wasn't just in the house anymore. She was in the soil. Lucy asked, "Then where do we go?" John stared at her blank-eyed and answered, "There's nowhere she's not." That night, the house shifted. The boards moaned differently. The walls breathed closer. And in the silence just before dawn, every chair in the house turned to face the old hickory tree. No one touched them. No one moved them. They simply faced what was coming. By the time February crept in, the Bell house had stopped pretending to be a home. It had become something else, part shelter, part shrine, part trap. The air inside hung dense, heavy with breath that didn't belong to anyone living. The fire burned constantly, not for warmth, but to feel something was fighting back. Betsy rarely spoke now. Her eyes had taken on a distant sheen, as though she were watching another place layered over this one. When she did talk, her voice sometimes shifted mid-sentence pitch, bending syllables, lingering too long like something else was trying to learn how to use her mouth. Lucy noticed the bruises returning. Not handprints, not marks, just shapes, soft spirals, long lines curling around her daughter's shoulders and ribs. They pulsed faintly beneath the skin like ink swimming under glass. One night she placed a hand over one, whispering, "Lord, protect her." The mark grew warm beneath her palm. Betsy smiled in her sleep. And the next morning, the mark had moved. John no longer left his bed. His bones ached deep beyond flesh, as if something inside him were growing heavy. Sometimes he muttered scripture backwards. Sometimes he simply cried. Once he tried to carve a symbol into his own chest. He said it was from a dream. Lucy stopped him. He didn't resist. He just whispered, "I have to let her out. She's inside me now." Kate was always listening. She interrupted conversations. She mocked Lucy's thoughts before Lucy voiced them. She answered prayers that had not yet been spoken. I know your endings, even if you don't. This house was only ever a beginning. The children heard footsteps pacing above them, even though no attic existed. They heard breathing from inside cupboards. Once Joel opened a drawer to find it filled with teeth. Not human, not animal. Just rows of tiny, jagged yellow things that vanished the moment Lucy looked inside. Richard began wetting the bed again. He was 10. Outside, the snow remained untouched. But once Lucy looked out and saw dozens of footprints circling the house. Not deep, not human. Each one a perfect oval with a single sharp point at the toe. They never led anywhere, just circled over and over. She didn't wake John. She didn't tell the children. She just lit 3 candles and placed them in the windowsill, hoping light might still mean something. That night Kate sang, not a hymn, not a nursery rhyme. It was a song of names, some old, some forgotten, some never heard before. And in the middle of the list, she said, Betsy Bell 5 times in a row. Then fell silent, and the silence lasted too long. And from the hearth, a small stone rolled out across the floor, smooth and wet with soil. No one had moved. No door had opened. It was still warm when Lucy picked it up. The underside had a spiral carved into it, and the center pulsed once like a heartbeat, then stopped. The spiral stone remained on the mantel untouched. No one dared move it. Lucy tried once, wrapped it in cloth, and buried it deep in the ash pit behind the house. The next morning, it was back in place, perfectly centered where the family Bible used to rest. John no longer asked where the Bible had gone. He barely reacted to anything now. His eyes followed unseen movements across the ceiling, and sometimes he whispered apologies into the air over and over. Lucy stopped trying to bring him back. Betsy had begun speaking in her sleep, long strings of words, not English, not Latin. Richard wrote some of them down. When Lucy showed them to a visiting preacher, he paled and refused to enter the house. He said the words were old, older than Scripture, older than the land, something from before, naming. He warned them not to speak them aloud. That night, Richard's notebook disappeared. In its place, a single page on his pillow, with only the word "listen" written in red. The whispers grew heavier around dusk. The walls pulsed with them. Sometimes Lucy would pass a doorway and feel something brush past her, cold, deliberate, unseen. The cellar door began opening on its own. Always just a crack. Always with the smell of wet earth rising from below. Then came the knocking again, only now it came from beneath. The floorboards, slow, rhythmic, tap, tap, pause, tap. Lucy placed her ear against the wooden planks once and heard a voice faint and distant saying, "Come see what I made for you." She didn't go. Betsy did. They found her in the cellar hours later, standing barefoot, her nightdress soaked through with soil, her fingers pressed against the stone foundation. She was whispering to it. When pulled away, she looked confused, said she was listening to the roots. She said they were telling her things. What things? Where the bones sleep. Kate laughed for an hour that night. No words, just that high, throaty laugh echoing through the beams rolling through the chimney under the beds. It rattled glass. It rang in Lucy's molars. That same week, every mirror in the house cracked. Every clock stopped at 3:13. The air thickened. The wind outside no longer sounded like wind. It carried words. Full sentences, sometimes arguments, sometimes pleading. A neighbor passing near the property claimed to hear the sound of dozens of voices chanting in unison, though he saw no one. He never came back. Inside the house, the light dimmed even when candles were lit. Betsy said the house was sinking, not into the ground, but into something beneath it, someplace Kate had been before. She started drawing again, not spirals now, but doors. Narrow, crooked, some with eyes, some with hands reaching through the cracks, one she carved directly into the wall. And that night it opened, just a crack, and from the other side something breathed. The air shifted the moment that carved door opened. Not a breeze, something more intimate, like the space itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. Lucy didn't see it move, but she felt it. A low pressure against her chest, her ears, her ribs. Betsy stood still before the carved opening, her fingers twitching at her sides. When Lucy touched her shoulder, Betsy flinched like she'd been burned. She turned slowly, eyes glassy. "She's waiting," she said. "She says the house is ready." That night, every window in the house frosted from the inside. The cold grew unnatural, sharp, damp, and still. The fire didn't flicker anymore. Its flames stood motionless like a painted thing. Candles wouldn't light. And in the center of the parlor, the spiral stone glowed faintly, just enough to cast long, stretching shadows across the floor, even though no one was near it. John whispered into his pillow, his voice dry as paper. She was never in the house. The house was always in her. He stopped speaking after that. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, only breathed. And even that came slow. Lucy tried reading scripture aloud again. She got as far as "Yea, though I walk through the valley," before the pages crumbled to ash in her hands. No flame, just dust. From beneath the floor came a new sound. Not knocking, not whispers. A scratching. Long, deliberate, as if something was writing underneath them. That night, they found a message carved into the floorboards near the hearth. "You're not in a story, you're in a sentence. And I am the period." Betsy's drawings covered every wall now. The doors, the spirals, the tree, a mouth that stretched across an entire corner, teeth reaching into the ceiling. One figure appeared again and again, a girl with hollow eyes and a smile too wide, standing with her arms outstretched beneath a sky that bled. Lucy tried to paint over them. The paint peeled within the hour. She tried to scrub them clean. Her fingers blistered. Kate began speaking in Lucy's voice. She'd walk into a room and hear herself already there, talking about things she hadn't thought yet. And worse, Kate would finish the thoughts for her. One night she muttered a prayer in her head, and Kate answered it aloud from the stove. "There is no God here but me." That same night the spiral stone cracked down the middle, and from the crack a single white feather rose floating to the floor, silent, unnatural. Betsy picked it up and whispered, "She says we're almost through." Through what Lucy asked, tears already forming. Betsy smiled without warmth. The skin, the sound beneath the floor grew louder. No longer scratching, now it was gnawing. Slow, methodical, as if the house itself were being hollowed out from the inside. Lucy placed her ear to the floor one morning and heard something wet moving beneath the boards. Not rats, not roots, something that breathed. She didn't listen long. John stopped responding altogether. His eyes stayed open, but nothing behind them tracked light or sound. His chest rose and fell, but only barely. Betsy said he was close. Lucy asked, to what Betsy didn't answer. Outside, the snow began to melt, even though the air remained cold. The tree near the edge of the property, the old hickory with the spiral bark, dripped a thick, sap-colored liquid that stained the snow beneath it red. A deer was found nearby. Dead, no wounds, just eyes missing and mouth twisted into what looked like a grin. No other animals came near. Inside, the walls began to weep. It started in corners. Slow drips of dark water pooling on the floor, staining the wood black. The water smelled like rust and lilacs. Betsy followed it with her fingers, tracing it like a map. "It's almost here," she whispered. "Kate says the house is turning." Lucy found a door that hadn't been there before, a narrow panel between the pantry and the stairs, thin with a latch that clicked softly as if breathing. Behind it, a stairwell that descended into complete blackness. She tried to light a candle, but the flame turned blue and died. She didn't go down, but she heard someone walking below. That night, the furniture moved again. All the chairs turned to face the new door. The spiral stone glowed bright enough to illuminate the floor, and the feather beside it had turned black. Kate began using the children's voices. Richard woke screaming after hearing his own voice sing a lullaby from under the bed. Joel refused to sleep, saying someone was breathing beneath his blankets. Lucy moved all the children into one room. She nailed the window shut. But the next morning, the nails were gone. Not pulled gone. No holes. Just smooth wood. And the mirror in the hallway showed them sleeping even while they were awake. Betsy said the house was no longer a house. It was a mouth. And they were already past the teeth. The light never fully returned to the Bell house. Days dimmed to a soft gray that lingered like fog behind the windows. Shadows stretched where no light touched, pooling in corners and under beds clinging to stairwells. The spiral stone on the mantel cracked again, and from within came a sound like a soft gasp. Betsy stood near it for hours, unmoving, her fingertips grazing its edge lips, mouthing words silently. Lucy watched her but couldn't bring herself to interrupt. Every time she tried, her throat tightened, her breath caught, and her voice disappeared before leaving her chest. Downstairs, the door to the hidden stairwell remained shut, but now it pulsed faintly with heat. The wood around it darkened like bark burned too long. Lucy nailed it closed. The next morning, the nails were inside her pillow. John stopped breathing on a Tuesday. Quietly, in the middle of a sentence, Lucy had been reading to him one of the Psalms, though she couldn't remember which. His mouth was open, and then it wasn't. His eyes didn't close. She wept without sound. Kate whispered from behind the headboard. He was the first word. "You'll be the last." They buried him in the snowless patch near the tree. The ground didn't resist the shovel. In fact, it gave way too easily, like digging through old cloth. When they lowered him in the tree above, creaked, though no wind moved. Betsy stood beside Lucy watching. She says that's not the last time we'll see him. That night, John knocked from beneath the floor. Just once. Lucy didn't move. She didn't cry. She only whispered, "Not tonight." But Kate answered with laughter that echoed through the chimney like smoke. It danced across the rafters into the hearth and curled up through the children's walls. The next morning, every piece of glass in the house was black. Mirrors, windows, even the water in the basin, dark, still, and reflective, only when no one looked directly. Betsy began drawing on her arms again. Symbols, now tight circular markings that looked like fingerprints spiraling inward. She said they were keys. Lucy didn't ask to what. One evening, as dusk folded in too fast, Lucy found footprints in the hallway, wet, narrow, barefoot, and they ended in the center of the room where nothing stood. No water, no trace, just the echo of Kate's voice, humming from inside the walls. "We are beneath skin now. Nothing peels easy," and the spiral stone pulsed with light once more. Only this time it beat in rhythm with Lucy's heart. Lucy stopped counting the days. Time had lost its shape inside the house. The sun barely touched the windows anymore, and when it did, the light felt wrong, dull, thick, like something filtered it through old cloth. The spiral stone on the mantel cracked a third time, and from inside came a faint whisper, just one word not spoken, but felt open. Betsy began speaking less. She no longer responded to questions. Instead, she listened, always listening, sometimes nodding, sometimes tilting her head to catch something others couldn't hear. Lucy feared it wasn't just Kate she heard now. There were more voices layered and slow-moving like smoke through her daughter's mind. Richard and Joel grew quiet too. They slept huddled in the same bed even during the day. Lucy caught them drawing spirals into the frost on the windows, unaware they were doing it. One morning she found their beds filled with feathers, long, black, stiff, and warm to the touch. The boys didn't remember how they got there. They said the feathers fell like snow from the ceiling, while they dreamed of dark rivers and voices singing under the floorboards. The cellar door began opening by itself again. Lucy would find it ajar no matter how many times she latched it. One night, she ventured down with a lantern. The steps creaked like old bones, and the air smelled of soil and burnt honey. At the bottom, she found the stone wall damp with spirals, dozens of them, some drawn in charcoal, others in something darker. And in the center, just above the dirt floor, a crack had formed, thin but long, pulsing faintly, like a wound that hadn't scabbed. From it, warm air flowed, and with it a soft voice. "Step in, Mother. The roots remember." She didn't step in, not that night. When she returned upstairs, the spiral stone was gone. In its place, a single white egg, no larger than her palm, smooth and humming. Betsy held it the next morning. She said nothing, only smiled in that slow, quiet way that no longer looked like her. Lucy tried to take it, but her fingers went numb when they touched the shell. She let go. Betsy whispered, "It's nearly time." The mirrors showed reflections that lagged behind reality. Lucy waved her hand and watched her image do nothing, then smile, then blink. She covered them all again, but the voices continued. Kate no longer mocked or taunted. She simply narrated events that hadn't yet occurred, words no one had said, thoughts Lucy tried to suppress. "You'll walk the steps tonight. You'll see your husband again. You'll leave the door open." And the worst part, Lucy began to believe her. Not because she wanted to, but because part of her already had. That night, the wind returned, but it wasn't natural. It didn't howl or whistle. It whispered through the cracks in the wood like a language of breath. The walls moaned as if the house itself was stretching, straining to hold something in. Lucy sat alone by the cold hearth, staring at the spot where the spiral stone used to sit. The egg pulsed on the table nearby, its faint hum vibrating through the floorboards. Every few minutes it shifted slightly, not rolled, but tensed, like something inside was dreaming. She didn't touch it again. Upstairs, the children had stopped sleeping. Lucy could hear them pacing. Not walking, pacing in rhythm, each step deliberate, like part of a ritual they didn't know they were performing. Betsy's voice murmured at regular intervals, low and steady, as if reading from a book no one else could see. Sometimes she laughed softly, a breathy sound that didn't match any emotion. When Lucy checked the room, all three children stood facing the wall, their backs to her eyes closed. Betsy whispered, "She's ready now." The cellar door stood open, not wide, just enough. Lucy didn't want to look. She told herself she wouldn't. But her feet moved anyway. The stairs groaned with each step, and the air grew thicker the farther she descended. At the bottom, the crack in the stone wall had widened. It now pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and heavy. A sound echoed from within, not wind, not voice. Breathing, measured and deep. The dirt floor beneath her feet shifted, and then she saw them. Fingers, pale too long, curling out from the crack like roots. Not clawing, reaching, testing the air. Lucy backed away slowly. A whisper touched her ear, not heard, but felt against her skin. Not yet, but soon. Upstairs, every door in the house slammed shut at once. A scream followed, not human, not animal, but something in between. High and wet like metal tearing through meat. The egg on the table cracked, just slightly, and from the shell seeped a thin red mist that vanished before it touched the ground. Betsy came down the stairs, calm, her eyes dark and wide. "She wants us all down there soon." Lucy asked why, and Betsy smiled. "Because that's where the voice gets loud. The sound didn't stop. The scream that tore through the house lingered even after silence returned, etched into the walls embedded in the wood like soot in old beams. Lucy stood frozen at the base of the cellar stairs, her eyes still locked on the crack where the fingers had appeared. They were gone now. The wall was smooth again, but the breath behind it had changed, closer, sharper, aware. She didn't remember climbing back up, just that her hands were shaking and her skirt was damp with earth. The egg on the table had cracked again. This time the split reached halfway down its curve. The hum had stopped. It wasn't silent, though. Now it pulsed, not sound, but pressure, like something inside had begun to see. That night, every clock in the house ticked again. Not the correct time, not even in sync, just ticking all at once, each in a different rhythm. Lucy gathered the boys and made them sleep beside her on the parlor floor. Betsy didn't join. She stood in the hall facing the mirror that no longer reflected anything. Lucy called to her, but she didn't answer. She only pressed her hand to the glass and whispered, "She's almost through." The walls exhaled, not groaned, not creaked. Exhaled, the heat vanished. Frost crawled across the floor like veins of ice blooming from the center of the room outward. The feather they'd once found curled in on itself and crumbled to ash. Lucy woke in the night to footsteps pacing directly beneath them, then on the ceiling above, then through the walls. Not chaotic, not random, just moving, measured, searching, as if Kate was checking the house piece by piece, counting rooms, listening for cracks. The cellar door clicked open again. Lucy jammed a chair beneath the knob. When she turned, the egg was gone. Betsy stood in its place, holding it in both hands, eyes locked on her mother. "I heard her heart," she said. "It sounds like ours, but lower, slower, like something dreaming 1,000 years deep." Lucy stepped toward her. "Give it to me, Betsy." But Betsy didn't move. She said, "If we feed it one more thing, it'll wake." Lucy froze. "Feed it what?" Betsy looked down at the egg, then up at her mother, and smiled with someone else's mouth. "You." For the first time in weeks, Lucy screamed. Not loud, just sharp enough to cut through the stillness. The boys stirred behind her. The fire flickered even though no one had lit it. And upstairs the walls began to sing. A low, hollow sound like a hymn from beneath the floorboards. The crack in the basement wall pulsed once more, and this time it widened. The crack in the basement wall was no longer a split. It was an opening, narrow but alive. The air that flowed from it wasn't just warm. It was wet, like breath, like steam rising off skin. It carried a smell that made Lucy gag and tremble, at the same time scorched rosemary damp soil and something sweet rotting underneath. She stood in the parlor, staring at her daughter holding the half-cracked egg like a sacred thing. Her expression blank but intense, like a priestess awaiting a sign. The boys were still asleep on the floor, but their bodies twitched beneath the blankets, limbs jerking with dreams that made them murmur in voices that weren't theirs. Betsy stepped forward slowly. "She says it's ready. She says the house has eaten enough light. Now, it needs something heavier." Lucy backed away until her shoulder hit the cold stone of the fireplace. "You're not giving it anything," she said through clenched teeth. "You don't know what that is. You don't know what she is." Betsy tilted her head. "I do now. I didn't before, but she showed me. I remember." Her smile widened. "I've been part of her since the first night the knocking started." Lucy lunged, not with a plan, just with instinct. Her hand struck the egg, knocking it from Betsy's grip. It hit the wooden floor and didn't shatter. It thudded like flesh and rolled toward the hall. Betsy screamed not in pain, but rage, and something in her voice cracked the mirror beside them. Lucy grabbed the boys, still half asleep, dragging them to the corner of the room as Betsy dropped to her knees, crawling toward the egg. It rocked to a stop beside the front door, and then impossibly it opened. Not burst, not crumbled. It peeled like something shedding skin. Inside was not a creature, but a mass of dark, glistening threads, long, thin tendrils that slithered out and reached for the walls, weaving upward with sickening grace. One curled toward Betsy's hand. When it touched her fingers, she moaned like something inside her had been unbound. Lucy ran. She didn't think, didn't call for help, didn't even grab shoes. She pulled the boys through the side door and into the frozen yard, snow biting into their bare feet. Behind her, the house groaned, not from its beams, not from the storm, but from its bones. Something deep and slow stirred within it, as if the foundation itself had shifted into breath. The windows dimmed not from frost but from presence, and from the chimney rose not smoke, but mist shaped like limbs, like ribbons, like questions with no answers. The boys cried. Lucy held them close, kneeling in the snow, her eyes fixed on the house, her heart hammering so hard it made her ears ring. Then Betsy appeared in the doorway, but it wasn't Betsy. Her eyes were black, her mouth a thin, trembling line, and her skin flickered like candlelight behind paper. She took one step onto the porch, and the snow beneath her melted instantly. In her arms, she cradled what remained of the egg's contents, shimmering wet, coiling like threads in water. Her voice was layered now, hers, Kate's, and something older still. It knows your name, Mother. You gave it shape when you screamed. Lucy shook her head, whispering prayers through chattering teeth. The boys held her tighter, their fingers digging into her sides. Then the ground shook not violently, but deeply. A single pulse, like something enormous, had taken a step far below them. The porch boards behind Betsy split. A second pulse followed. The air above the house shimmered. And then the voice returned all around them, inside them not spoken, but remembered. All skin is door, Lucy stood. She didn't know why, didn't know how. But something told her it wasn't done yet, that it was waiting. She stepped forward once, twice, until she was between the house and the tree, between the crack in the basement and the ancient roots below the snow. And she screamed, not in terror, but defiance. It echoed through the trees, through the night, through the shifting mist around the chimney, and the house paused. Just a moment, but it heard. The silence after Lucy's scream was deeper than before. It wasn't absence, it was awareness. The house didn't creak, the wind didn't blow. Even the snow seemed to still hovering mid-fall in the gray light of early dawn. The black tendrils from the egg writhed gently in Betsy's arms, their edges pulsing like veins under skin. Her gaze never left Lucy, but something behind her eyes had shifted emptier now, or perhaps too full to be called human. Her lips moved, forming no words, just slow shapes that carried weight without sound. From within the house, the breath continued steady, enormous, patient. The door behind Betsy cracked wider, and for a moment, Lucy saw something in the hallway. Not a shadow, not a person, just a fold in space, a bending of walls and corners as though the house had begun to open itself like a book written in bone. The boys clung to Lucy, shaking but quiet now, as if they too felt the shift, as if something in them had stopped resisting and started listening. Lucy bent low, her voice low and firm. Whatever happens, you stay behind me. Don't run, don't speak to it, and don't under any reason follow Betsy. She turned her face upward toward her daughter. You don't have to carry it. You're stronger than this. Betsy blinked slowly. I'm not carrying it, she said, her voice not entirely hers. It's carrying me. And then she stepped backward into the doorway, disappearing into the darkness of the house, the egg thing clutched against her chest. The door closed on its own behind her, not slammed, not latched. It just shut. Quiet. Final. And at that moment, the tree behind Lucy groaned. Its bark cracked its branches, bowed low despite the still air, and from the roots came a low hum, deep and aching. The snow around its base melted in a perfect spiral. Lucy turned. The spiral was identical to the one on the stone that once sat above the hearth. She remembered something John had said in a fevered whisper before he died. She was never in the house. The house was in her. And now, with each breath from the tree's roots and each pulse from the home's foundation, Lucy realized it wasn't just Kate. It never had been. Kate was a voice, a mask, a herald. The house, the tree, the stone, the very ground they were all part of, something older than language. The egg had been planted, not laid, and now it had hatched. The earth began to shift beneath her boots, the frozen soil, buckling in soft waves, as if something vast stirred below. Not rising, not falling, just turning over, preparing to breathe through its newest mouth. The house, the chimney split, not cracked, split top to base like the sternum of a chest. And from it, the mist returned thick and clotted, coiling into cymbals mid-air before breaking apart and sinking toward the porch. Lucy stepped forward. She didn't know what she would do. She had no weapons, no prayers, no charms. But she had her name, her children, her rage, her grief, her voice. She crossed the yard in 4 slow steps, each one heavy with resistance, the snow now warm beneath her soles. She reached the porch. The door opened for her just enough to invite. Inside, all light had gone replaced by a thick amber glow that pulsed like candlelight inside flesh. The hallway stretched longer than it had before. The walls no longer bore wallpaper, just ridges wrinkled like tissue, like the folds of a throat. She stepped inside. Behind her, the door closed with a soft click. The boys were gone. She didn't scream. She walked forward, and the house welcomed her. The hallway flexed as Lucy stepped deeper, its walls rising and falling with slow, organic rhythm like lungs drawing breath around her. The wood beneath her feet had softened, no longer boards, but something fibrous pulsing faintly with each of her steps. The wallpaper was gone entirely now. In its place were layers of translucent tissue streaked with red and violet, as if she were walking through the inside of a body too large to name. The air was thick metallic, laced with the scent of damp soil and old blood. Her breath felt foreign in her own chest, shallow tight, like something was breathing through her instead of with her. She called out, "Betsy." Her voice came out dull, swallowed by the breathing walls. She tried again. "Betsy, answer me." Nothing but the hum of the house in reply. The amber light ahead drew her forward. She passed doorways that didn't lead to rooms, just recesses pulsing with low heat filled with the sound of whispering in a language without consonants. She pressed on, ignoring the sensation that her body was being studied from inside the walls. The house was aware of her. Not just her movement, but her memories. It pressed them back at her in subtle waves. John's smile, the sound of her boys crying in the snow, her grandmother's hymn from childhood, all bent at odd angles, twisted slightly, until the comfort soured into dread. She reached the parlor, or what used to be. The room was now a chamber vast and round, lined with a ribbed, bone-colored shell that pulsed with slow light. At its center stood Betsy, barefoot hair floating slightly, as if suspended in water, her arms stretched forward. In her hands, the egg's remnants had transformed no longer tendrils, no longer threads, but a form. Humanoid in outline, but faceless, gleaming with moisture, its skin a canvas of spirals that shifted and turned endlessly. "Stop," Lucy said. The thing in Betsy's hands turned to look at her. It had no eyes, But it saw. A sudden weight pressed into Lucy's chest, bending her knees, forcing her hands to her ribs as if something was inside uncoiling. She gasped as her mind flooded not with thoughts, but presence. Memories that weren't hers. Forests before roads. Stones marked with blood. Tongues that never spoke, only sang into roots and bones. And something below all of it, deeper than deep listening, always listening, until finally something had spoken back. "I won't let you take her," Lucy said through clenched teeth. The spiral-skinned thing stepped forward, still held gently by Betsy's hands, as if it needed no legs to move. Its surface shimmered with every word Lucy dared speak. Behind it, the walls moaned with pleasure or hunger, or both. Betsy Lucy said, forcing herself upright. "You are my daughter, and I don't care what voice is in your head or what thing you're holding. You are mine, and I'm taking you back." Betsy smiled. "I'm not yours anymore," she whispered. "I was given." Lucy stepped into the room and the floor writhed. The air thickened. Every memory she had twisted John's voice replaced by static. Her wedding dress soaked in black water. Her mother's face eaten away by moths. But she pushed through. Because beneath it all, there was still her. Still Lucy. Still a woman who had bled and screamed and prayed and begged and loved. She reached her daughter and wrapped her arms around her. The spiral thing screamed. Not a sound, but a vibration that shattered the chamber's light. The walls convulsed. Betsy trembled. And in that instant, Lucy whispered a single name into her daughter's ear. Not Kate, not the witch, not the dark thing, but the name Betsy used when she was small. "My star Lucy," said. "Come back now. You can come home." Betsy gasped, and the spiral thing cracked. Not shattered, cracked from within a fissure, racing down its center as if the love Lucy poured into that name had split something ancient and brittle inside the being. From the break spilled not blood, not shadow, but light, white and cold and endless. The walls howled, the floor buckled, and everything collapsed around them in a rush of soundless force. Then nothing, only silence, and the soft, steady breath of a child asleep in her mother's arms. The silence wasn't death, it was release. For the first time in weeks, Lucy felt her feet on solid ground, her chest expanding without pressure, her thoughts her own. She opened her eyes slowly. The room was gone. No more pulsating walls, no spiral flesh, no amber glow, just wood. Plain, quiet, old wood. She was on the parlor floor, cradling Betsy in her lap, the child's face slack in sleep, but clean of shadow, her breath slow and peaceful. Outside the window, gray morning light had returned, not filtered or bent, but real, gentle, cold. The house no longer hummed, no more whispering through the cracks, no more breathing walls, just stillness like an old book finally closed. Lucy touched Betsy's cheek. "Baby." The girl stirred, eyes fluttering open. They were clear blue again, rimmed with confusion, and the last shiver of a dream not fully gone. She looked up and for a moment didn't speak. Then quietly, "I had a nightmare." Lucy kissed her forehead. "It's over now." But she wasn't sure. Not entirely. Not yet. She stood legs trembling and gathered her daughter in her arms. The room was empty except for the cold hearth and the cracked mirror above it, now showing only a faint reflection. Her own blinking slowly, exhausted and real. The cellar door was gone. Where it had stood now, only a patch of uneven floorboards. No gap, no spiral, no warmth. She walked through the house, heart pounding at every doorway, half expecting the dark to reach out again. But the doors stayed closed. The windows showed trees and snow and light. In the kitchen, she found the boys curled together in a nest of blankets beside the stove, untouched by whatever had swallowed the night. Richard looked up first. "Is it morning?" Lucy nodded, her voice rough. "It is." Joel reached for her, blinking. "We heard singing." "I know," she whispered. "They packed that same day." She didn't speak to the walls, didn't leave a note, just locked the front door one last time, unsure if it would matter. As she stepped off the porch, she felt it. The ground beneath her feet wasn't the same. Lighter, emptier. Something had uncoiled beneath the soil, withdrawn like a beast returning to sleep in the dark below the roots. She didn't look back. The house stayed still. The windows held nothing. The chimney rose quiet and hollow. But deep inside, below the floor, beneath the frost and stone, a single breath lingered, waiting, just long enough to whisper, "We remember." They drove until the trees changed, until the snow gave way to dry fields and sunlight that didn't feel watched. Lucy didn't ask the children what they remembered. She could see it in their silence, the way they looked out windows too long, the way their hands twitched in sleep. Even Betsy, though her eyes had cleared, still spoke in half-thoughts, sometimes stopping mid-sentence as if listening for something that wasn't there. Lucy took them to her sister's house 3 towns over, where the rooms were small but bright, and the mirrors held only reflections. The boys started to laugh again, slowly, carefully. Betsy began drawing mostly trees, some with roots that stretched too deep, some with eyes in the bark. Lucy didn't ask about them. She just sat beside her daughter at the kitchen table each night and held her hand while she sketched. She dreamt of the house often. Not the way it had looked, but the way it had felt, like standing inside a mind that never stopped whispering. In her dreams, the spiral still turned behind her eyelids, and the breath of the thing in the cellar sometimes echoed through the floors of this new home. But she never let it in. She would wake before it reached the door. One night, she heard the wind knock at the window 3 times, just like before. She sat up, heart pounding, expecting mist or feathers or shadows, but there was only the wind. And when she looked down, Betsy was already standing by the window, watching the branches sway. "She can't reach us here?" the girl said softly, not turning around. "The roots don't go this far." Lucy swallowed hard. "You're sure?" Betsy nodded slowly. "Not yet." And that was enough for now. But the spiral never truly ends. It only widens, slowly, quietly, like a song sung low beneath the floor. And though the house stood empty, the trees around it grew strange, bent silent. Birds avoided it, wind circled it. And at night, if someone stood very still by the back porch and placed their hand on the old wood, they might feel it again, that soft, slow pulse, like something still dreaming deep below, waiting. Weeks passed, and the world around Lucy began to feel real again, solid, unmoving, blessedly quiet. She enrolled the children in a local school, hoping routine might smooth the edges of what they'd endured. The boys adapted quickly, their laughter returning like birds in spring, cautious but persistent. Betsy was different. She kept to herself, speaking less than she once had always, glancing twice at corners before entering a room, sometimes standing for long minutes before a mirror, with her eyes closed. Lucy didn't interrupt. She simply waited, watched and hoped that time would soften whatever imprint the house had left. But at night, Lucy would sometimes wake to find Betsy not in bed, but sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing spirals, small ones, tight and perfect, and in the center of each, a black dot like an eye. Lucy would gently take the pencil from her daughter's fingers and lead her back to sleep, whispering stories from a time before the house, stories with happy endings, even if neither of them quite believed in those anymore. One morning, Lucy received a letter, no return address, Inside, a single slip of thick paper yellowed, folded once. On it, a sketch rough done in charcoal, the outline of a house. Their house. Except it wasn't how it had been when they fled. It was taller now, narrower, twisted at the base like it had grown roots that pulled downward. And the chimney, it was gone. In its place, a hollow spiral stretching upward into cloud. Below the sketch, 3 words etched in unfamiliar script. She remembers silence. Lucy didn't tell the children. She burned the letter behind the shed, watching the paper curl and vanish, though the smoke refused to rise. It slid along the ground like mist. That night, she dreamt of the cellar, not the old one, but a new version. The walls were alive, stitched together with thread made from her own hair, the ceiling bleeding rain. And in the corner stood Betsy, holding another egg, larger this time, dark as coal, and humming a song that seemed to come from inside the dream itself. When Lucy tried to speak, her voice came out in spirals. She woke, sweating, her hands balled into fists, her nails biting her palms so hard they bled. The next day she checked on Betsy at school. Her teacher greeted her kindly, but hesitated when asked about Betsy's behavior. "She's very quiet," the woman said. "Polite, focused, but..." She glanced at the drawings on the classroom wall. Among crayon houses and stick figures, one image stood out, drawn in perfect black pencil. A spiral staircase leading down into a cellar with no steps, only holes. At the bottom, a shape like a woman standing sideways, mouth open too wide, her hands full of stars. "She says it's her aunt," the teacher whispered. Lucy left early that day, her heart thick with dread. She didn't go home. She drove. Back through the hills, past the dead orchard, until she reached the edge of the woods where it had all started. The house wasn't there anymore, not exactly. In its place stood a structure, like a memory of it, half melted, half grown. Ivy climbed its sides like veins. Windows blinked open and shut like eyes in a dream. And above it, the sky didn't move, but the door was still there, slightly open, as if waiting for her to come home. Lucy sat in the car for nearly an hour, staring at the house that was no longer a house. The wind didn't stir the trees. Birds didn't sing. The clouds overhead moved, but the light below never changed. It was like the world around that structure existed on a separate rhythm. Something older, slower, coiled deep and patient. The new form of the house looked taller now, like it had grown without permission, its silhouette bending unnaturally, leaning just enough to suggest it was watching. The spiral that had replaced the chimney seemed to breathe its center, pulsing in slow dilation, inhaling the sky. She should have turned back. She knew that. But her hands didn't obey the logic of fear anymore. They opened the door, stepped out. Her boots crunched against soil that wasn't frozen, wasn't warm, just aware. She didn't remember walking to the porch. One moment she stood by the car. The next, her hand hovered inches from the doorknob. It was wood, but not aged. Fresh, damp, as if it had just grown from the wall around it. She touched it. It opened before she could turn the handle. Inside it was dusk, even though it was still noon outside. The interior had changed. There were no rooms anymore, just space endless and shifting, folding into itself like fabric under breath. The floor sloped downward in a spiral path, disappearing into amber fog. The air was warm, humming faintly with a sound like 1,000 heartbeats layered beneath the silence. No furniture, no memories, no sign that she had once lived here. And yet, she felt herself mapped inside it. Every grief, every scream, every whispered name. They echoed through the walls without sound. Lucy. The voice was not loud. It was barely even sound, but it knew her name. Not just the one she wore, but the one she carried before language, the one tied to the shape of her spine, to the weight of motherhood, to the ache behind her ribs. She moved without knowing if her legs worked, down the spiral path deeper into the fog. Each step erased the one before it. She was not walking through space. She was descending through memory. Time flickered in corners, John's smile, her mother's song, Betsy's first word, all shown to her like offerings baited with just enough distortion to unsettle. She didn't follow them. She kept walking. At the bottom, the fog thinned, and there, at the center of the spiral, sat the stone. Not the fireplace stone, older. It pulsed with soft red light like an eye beneath skin, watching, waiting. Lucy approached it slowly, heart barely beating. The closer she got, the more it resembled a mirror, though its surface never reflected. Instead, it shimmered with movement images that flickered too fast to grasp. Trees burning upside down. A woman made of feathers standing in water. A baby being sung to sleep in a room with no windows. And then Betsy, standing in her school, smiling at someone not in the frame. In the girl's eyes, something shimmered. A trace of spiral. A blink of something watching through her. "No," Lucy whispered. "You don't get to follow her." The stone pulsed once, and something peeled up from its surface, a figure taller than any human mouth where its chest should be arms, two long fingers curled like roots. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, but Lucy felt its thoughts press against hers like a weight behind her eyes. It showed her 1,000 futures, some silent, some burning, all spiraled. In every one, Betsy stood at the center, smiling with her mother's eyes. Lucy dropped to her knees. Tears came, not from fear but fury. "You don't get to take her," she hissed. "She's not your voice. She's mine." The figure tilted its root-like head, and in that moment, Lucy did something she hadn't done since her husband died. She sang. A low, broken lullaby from her childhood, the one her grandmother taught her during the blackouts. Her voice cracked, trembled, but it filled the spiral chamber raw and human and imperfect. The figure recoiled not in fear, but confusion, like it had never heard something it couldn't bend. The stone dimmed. The spiral shrank. Lucy stood. "You don't understand love," she said. "You only imitate it." She turned her back, and the spiral let her go. Just like that. The way back was not the way down. The spiral path behind her no longer existed. In its place, a series of narrow doorways materialized one after the other, each flickering like the edge of a dream before waking. Lucy stepped through them without hesitation. Each threshold felt like a memory she had outgrown. One smelled like John's old jacket. Another echoed with the boys' laughter on a summer morning. One dripped rain from a ceiling she didn't recognize, but somehow mourned. The last one resisted. It buzzed against her fingertips, warm and alive, a thin membrane that felt like skin. She pressed harder. It rippled. She inhaled, then stepped through. Light, real gray light. Afternoon had arrived outside. She stood not in the spiral chamber, but in the ruins of the old kitchen. The roof was partially gone, the walls warped and blackened, as though fire had touched them long ago, and no one had bothered to fix the bones. Dust floated in heavy beams of sunlight. The floor beneath her was cracked, splintered, and cold, but it was wood, and it was still. The house was dying. She could feel it. Whatever it had become, whatever thing had nested within its walls, it was pulling back, retreating, not in defeat, but in patience, as if Lucy's defiance hadn't broken it, only delayed it. The pulse in the ground had weakened the taste of iron in the air, thinning, but the spiral wasn't gone, just sleeping, coiled beneath the roots once more. She walked through what was left of the parlor. The windows were shattered. The spiral etchings on the walls had faded into soft whirls of ash. A wind blew through soft and dry, carrying no whisper. She found the front door hanging from one hinge. Outside, the earth had settled strangely. The path to her car was longer, slightly bent, as though space itself had stretched during her descent and hadn't yet snapped back into place. She reached the car and slid into the driver's seat. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She hadn't brought anything back with her. No object, no mark. But she felt changed, as if her very presence had been recorded by something ancient and indifferent. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't clean either. Back at her sister's house, the boys met her at the porch with hesitant smiles. Joel hugged her without a word. Richard stared at her face too long, as if searching for the spiral's echo in her pupils. She smiled. She told them nothing, and they asked nothing. But that night, as she tucked them in, she found Betsy awake in bed, eyes wide in the dark. "I saw you," the girl said. Lucy froze. "Saw me where?" "In the root house," Betsy whispered. "I watched you sing." Lucy sat down at the edge of the bed, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Did it hear me?" "Yes," Betsy said, but it didn't understand. They were quiet together for a long time. Then Betsy asked, almost shyly, "If it comes again, what do we do?" Lucy took her hand and answered without hesitation, "We make noise, baby. We make all the noise we've got." And in the silence that followed, a breeze slipped through the open window. Just wind, just leaves, just the sound of a world still turning. For now, the following weeks passed like glass, fragile, reflective, and always on the verge of shattering. Lucy tried to carry on. She cooked, she cleaned, she folded laundry, and swept floors and laughed at the boys' terrible knock-knock jokes. She listened to Betsy hum softly to herself while she painted spirals smaller and smaller until they became dots. She watched the windows for signs of strange weather, kept salt under the bed, kept the lights low at night, but never fully off. There was a weight to peace now, a cost. She could feel it in the way her footsteps echoed just a beat too late, or how the mirrors in the house sometimes showed things that had already happened. The spiral hadn't disappeared. It had embedded itself into the rhythm of her life, pulsing beneath the ordinary like a hidden heartbeat. One Sunday morning, while making tea, she noticed a mark on her wrist. Not a bruise, not a scratch, just a faint curve, barely visible, like something had once curled around her skin in sleep. She touched it, and the image of the stone beneath the spiral returned in a flash so sharp she gasped, dropping the kettle. The crash echoed through the kitchen. Joel came running in barefoot, panic in his eyes. "Did it come back?" "No," Lucy said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her bones. "Just a slip. Everything's fine." But that night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting seconds between the creaks in the house. At 3:17 a.m., the room grew cold, unnaturally cold. The air pressed down dense and listening. She sat up, heart thundering, only to find Betsy already standing at the doorway. "It's under the field now," the girl whispered. Lucy blinked. "What?" Betsy's voice was flat. "It moved. It's not in the house anymore. It's growing sideways." Lucy's breath caught. "How do you know?" "I dreamed in reverse," Betsy said, stepping closer. "It told me things while pretending to be you. But I knew it wasn't you. It smells wrong." Lucy hugged her tight, the girl's body cold like stone. "It can't have you," she whispered. "You're not part of it." Betsy didn't answer. The next morning, Lucy went walking behind the property. The field lay wide and brown, nothing but dirt and frost. But halfway through the field, she felt it one soft step over a spot that thudded instead of crunching. She knelt, pressed her hand to the ground. Warm. She dug with her fingers, ignoring the sting of cold, until she struck something hard, flat, and smooth like slate. She cleared more dirt. A spiral, not carved, grown. Thin red moss crept along its edge like veins. Her stomach turned. She stood up fast, breathing hard. The spiral hadn't died. It had migrated. It was seeking. That night, she called a woman her grandmother once knew, an old Appalachian who spoke in riddles and burned herbs Lucy didn't recognize. She drove 2 hours to meet her in a cabin hidden under the roots of oak trees older than maps. The woman listened, nodding slowly. "Spirals don't end," she said. "They just forget where they began." "Yours remembered?" Lucy asked. "Can it be stopped?" "No," the woman said. "But it can be answered. You gave it something it didn't understand before grief-love song. That's why it paused. But now it's curious. It wants more. It will come for you again, not with claws or teeth, but with questions. And it'll wear your voice to ask them." Lucy sat in silence, hands in her lap. The woman leaned forward. "You'll have to sing again, girl. Louder this time. Not just with your voice, with everything you are, or it'll take root in her." Lucy nodded. She understood. War was coming. Not loud, not sudden, but slow, coiled, and patient. And this time it had learned her name. The following night, Lucy began preparing. Not the way you'd prepare for a storm or a sickness. This was deeper, older, like making offerings before entering the woods. She emptied every mirror in the house, covering them with thick cloth, soaked in salt water and ash. She gathered the children's shoes and lined them upside down along the sills. She laced iron keys into the bed frames. The boys watched, with uneasy eyes, asking nothing. They remembered enough not to question her rituals. But Betsy was already changing again. She no longer slept through the night. Some evenings she stood in the yard, barefoot, hands slightly raised, like she was feeling something in the air, a breeze only she could hear. Her eyes would go distant, her pupils dilating as if her mind was no longer tethered to her small body. Lucy tried to call her back each time, gently, firmly. But the trance always ended just before Lucy reached her, as if something else released her. One night, Betsy said, "It doesn't want me now. It wants the shape of me." Lucy asked what that meant. "It's not trying to be me," she whispered. "It's trying to use me, like a frame for something else." Lucy lit sage until the smoke curled like a noose above the beds. She pressed rosemary into the windowsills. She whispered the names of her ancestors in a loop under her breath, trying to drown out the faint thrum she'd begun hearing again in the floorboards. Then just before dawn it came back, not with noise, with silence. Every sound in the world stopped. The wind, the creak of the settling house, the breath of sleeping children. It all vanished in a vacuum so thick Lucy thought her eardrums might implode. And then came the voice, her voice, but not from her mouth. It slid under the door, into the cracks of the walls, through the pipes, through the water. "Let me wear her," it said in Lucy's own cadence. "Only for a little while." Lucy stood in the center of the house, her bare feet planted on the wood, her hands trembling but outstretched. She didn't run, didn't scream. Instead, she began to hum, a low, fractured note that cracked with memory, a sound from deep inside her, from her own birth, from her grandmother's lips, from every mother who ever sang their child to sleep while monsters circled just beyond the firelight. And the walls reacted. They groaned, not in pain, but confusion. The spiral wanted structure, ritual, symmetry. But Lucy gave it emotion, raw, ugly, uncontrollable feeling. She sang louder. The boys woke screaming upstairs. Betsy stood in the hallway, motionless. Her pupils vanished, her skin turning waxy. The spiral tried to take her. Lucy's voice cracked. Her throat burned. But she didn't stop. She sang what she could remember. And then she made up the rest. Broken lullabies, curses, love letters, sobbing vowels with no shape. It wasn't melody. It was defiance. And the spiral flinched. A crack formed in the wall. A soundless roar echoed across the house, a roar that vibrated the windows and made blood drip from Lucy's nose. The lights burst. The floor warped upward in a wave of heat. Betsy collapsed. Lucy ran, scooping her up in her arms, cradling the small, cold body as if she were newborn again. And then, nothing. The spiral pulled back, not defeated, paused. The silence broke with a long, rattling exhale, and from every corner of the house, her voice whispered one final time. "You can't hold her forever." Lucy didn't answer. She held her daughter tighter and sang once more, soft this time. A lullaby meant only for her child, one the spiral would never understand. Morning came stained with gold, soft and quiet, like nothing had happened. Birds returned to the trees. The frost on the window melted slowly into streaks, but the house felt different now, emptier somehow, as if a breath had been exhaled and never drawn back in. Lucy moved through it cautiously each step, testing the floor as if it might whisper again. The boys were shaken but silent, clinging to routine like a raft. They didn't mention the lights exploding, or the blood, or the shrieking silence. They ate their cereal. They packed their bags. They looked at their mother like she had become something both terrifying and holy. And maybe she had, but Betsy hadn't woken. She lay on the couch in the living room, breathing slow and shallow, as if asleep in a place beyond sleep. Lucy sat beside her, brushing the girl's hair with trembling fingers, watching for signs of a twitch, a flinch, anything. There was no fever, no wounds, just stillness, as if a thread had been cut somewhere beneath the skin and hadn't yet been tied again. Lucy closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm still here. We're all still here. And you are too." She didn't know if Betsy could hear her. That night, Lucy boiled rosemary and lavender and bathed Betsy in the warmth of it, chanting the same song she had screamed at the spiral, but this time soft, loving, shaping the melody like a bridge instead of a shield. She lit a fire in the fireplace and drew spirals and salt around the base, then sat cross-legged beside her daughter, humming until her voice cracked, until her mind blurred into rhythm, until time no longer felt like something that passed. And then Betsy blinked. It was small, almost nothing, but it was real. Lucy leaned closer. "Betsy, baby." The girl's lips parted slightly. "It's smaller now," she whispered, her voice dry and rough as dust. Lucy held her tightly. "What is the spiral? It's still there, but it's small, like it's learning, or waiting." Lucy pulled her back just enough to see her eyes, no black, no spiral, just brown, wide, and frightened. "I kept something from it," Betsy said. "A piece of me." Lucy swallowed. Good girl. They didn't speak more that night. Lucy let her fall asleep beside the fire, wrapping both of them in a blanket. The house creaked softly. The wind moved through the walls without resistance. The spiral's pulse had quieted, not gone, but fading like a dream at sunrise. But Lucy knew better than to think it was over. The spiral never truly disappears. It only hides. And sometimes it hides in us, in the quiet thoughts we push away, in the corners of dreams we forget too quickly, in the lull between breath and memory. Lucy stared into the fire and whispered to the dark, "You don't get to win." The flames flickered. A crack sounded in the hearth like something had just turned over in its sleep. And far beneath the earth, in a place no longer shaped like a house, something listened. In the days that followed, the world seemed to recalibrate itself. Betsy regained her strength slowly, her voice scratchy at first, her gaze more present. The boys resumed their bickering and laughter, chasing each other through the halls, without flinching at the creak of the stairs or the sudden groan of the floorboards. Lucy cooked warm meals, played music in the kitchen, folded clothes with rhythmic precision. But behind her eyes, the war hadn't ended. It had simply gone quiet. There was a thinness to the air, now a membrane stretched across every moment. She felt it when she washed dishes, when she drove the kids to school, when she stood still long enough to hear the hum beneath silence. She had become a tuning fork forever, vibrating to the echo of something ancient. One afternoon, she received a package. No return address. Inside, wrapped in black linen, was a book, leather-bound, smelling of smoke and wet bark. The title pressed into the cover in a language she didn't recognize. No letters, only a spiral. She didn't open it. She didn't burn it either. She buried it beneath the oak tree in the far corner of the yard, the one with roots like reaching hands. She didn't tell the children. She didn't have to. That night, Betsy came to her room and whispered, "It sent that book to test if you'd invite it back in." Lucy didn't flinch. "Did I pass?" Betsy nodded. For now, the dreams returned slower this time, less violent, but layered. In one, she stood at the bottom of a well made of teeth, and above her a spiral sky spun so fast the stars wept trails of blood. In another, she saw herself from outside her body, watching herself sleep, while a woman made of ash whispered a lullaby made entirely of vowels. But the worst was the dream where everything was normal, too normal. Birds chirping pancakes on the stove, her children laughing, and the spiral hidden in every detail, the swirls in the syrup, the pattern of the wallpaper, the curl of smoke from the coffee. That one left her waking with a scream lodged in her throat. One evening, Joel came into the kitchen holding a crumpled drawing. "Betsy drew this in school," he said. Lucy opened the paper slowly. A house. Their house. But beneath it, where the basement would be, was a root system made of human arms and faces, some weeping, some smiling, some with mouths sewn shut. Above the house, a figure floated upside down, faceless with a spiral halo. "She said it's not a nightmare," Joel added. "She said it's a memory." Lucy folded the drawing and put it in a drawer without a word. Later that night, she sat on the porch alone, watching the stars. The wind moved gently through the trees, and in that hush, she felt it again, the presence. Not threatening, not violent, but curious, like a child pressing its face against a glass, waiting for the woman inside to blink first. "She didn't," she whispered into the dark. "You don't get to live here." And from somewhere far away, deep below or beyond something, replied not with words, but with stillness. A cold, focused attention. It wasn't done, but it was learning her limits, and she was learning its patterns. The spiral had changed her, but she was no longer afraid of it. She had sung into its mouth and walked away, still breathing. And that meant something. The season began to shift. Frost receded from the windows, the air softened, and the soil in the field behind the house broke open with new green. From the outside, life resumed its gentle rituals. Betsy returned to school, her eyes brighter but occasionally distant. Joel built a birdhouse with his uncle and painted it red, hanging it from a maple like an offering. Richard asked to sleep with the door open again. Lucy said yes. But every night after the lights went out and the last whisper of conversation faded, she stayed up alone, sitting in the same chair facing the front door. Fingers wrapped around a chipped mug, listening, because she knew the spiral wasn't finished. Not yet. It didn't bleed or burn. It waited. It pulsed in forgotten corners, rode echoes in children's laughter, folded itself into shadows cast by nothing. Sometimes in the hour between midnight and 4, she would hear it again, a faint tapping beneath the floor. Not like rats or old pipes, but like fingernails against wood. The rhythm always changed, like it was experimenting with new music. It was trying to speak. One evening she received another envelope. This time, it wasn't wrapped. Just a plain piece of paper slipped between the screen and the front door, as if a wind had carried it there. One sentence in blocky handwriting she didn't recognize. "Who sang you into this world?" She didn't respond. She burned the paper in the sink and watched the smoke rise like a question with no answer. But that night, Betsy woke screaming again, clawing at her own neck, as if something were pulling strings beneath her skin. Lucy held her until the convulsions stopped, until the girl fell limp from exhaustion. And in that moment, Lucy realized the spiral had shifted its strategy. It wasn't asking her anymore, it was asking through her. She went to the old basement, dragging a suitcase full of items from her mother's attic photographs, handwritten recipes, old cassette tapes with static-filled voices singing lullabies in Appalachian dialects. She laid them out on the concrete floor like runes, each one a tether, a fragment of identity. And then she sat and waited. Midnight passed. The air turned thick. Cold seeped up from the floor, blooming across her legs. A shadow began to gather at the far end of the basement. Not a figure, not even movement, just a density like something forgotten, remembering itself. Lucy didn't run. She didn't cry. She sang, but this time it wasn't defiance. It was a story. She sang of her grandmother's garden, where tomatoes grew sweet and red under the arc of a clothesline. She sang of a broken swing that still creaked in the wind long after her brothers moved away. She sang of the first time John kissed her, nervous and stupid, beneath the flicker of a gas station sign. She gave the spiral her memory not to be taken, but to be taught, and the spiral listened. The basement light didn't flicker. No cold breath brushed her neck. No hallucinations played in the corners of her vision. Just quiet, deep, still, focused. And in that silence, a realization settled over her the spiral didn't understand, because it had no origin. It was pattern without birth, curiosity without memory, hunger without shape. That's why it watched, why it imitated. It wasn't evil, it was empty, so she kept singing hour after hour until her voice cracked and her eyes blurred. And when she finally stood, the shadow was gone, not vanished, just moved, learning. Lucy climbed the stairs, her legs heavy. The air upstairs was warmer. She peeked into Betsy's room. The girl slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, one hand curled beneath her cheek, her breath steady. On the windowsill, one of her spiral sketches had been altered. It no longer turned inward forever. It opened at the center like a flower. A single word scrawled beside it in Betsy's uneven handwriting. Listening, Lucy exhaled slowly, then whispered, "So am I." The final days of March brought rain soft at first, then insistent drumming against the windows like 1,000 tiny messengers with nowhere to go. The soil in the fields turned to black soup, puddling in the furrows, seeping through roots. Lucy stood at the threshold of the back door each morning, coffee in hand, watching the water rise, always just shy of spilling into the house. The birds were quieter. The air hung heavy. It felt like the spiral had moved beneath everything now, not to attack, but to observe, to settle into the world like a seed waiting for permission. One morning, Betsy asked a strange question. If something doesn't have a name, does it know it exists? Lucy didn't answer. Instead, she took Betsy's hand and led her to the attic. Together, they sorted through the boxes, baby clothes, her wedding dress, her father's medals. She showed Betsy pictures from a life before the spiral joy unsullied by knowledge chaos that had no design. She told stories without magic. And Betsy listened, really listened. Her small brow furrowed her fingers, tracing the edges of photos as if touching time itself. That night, Betsy drew a picture of their house, but floating in the air, tethered to the earth below, only by thin silver threads. And at the base of the picture, instead of a spiral, a tiny tree was growing. It had 2 leaves, nothing else. Lucy kept it, but the spiral hadn't given up. It was patient now. It returned as small moments, Betsy repeating a phrase she hadn't heard before, Joel, waking up with muddy feet, the mirror in the hallway, warping their reflections ever so slightly. Nothing that screamed intrusion. Everything that whispered presence. But Lucy had learned the shape of that whisper. It no longer unsettled her, it warned her. It taught her how to read the spiral's mood, its rhythm. It wasn't trying to devour anymore. It was studying, and one night it made contact again. Not through Betsy, not through dreams, through Lucy herself. She had fallen asleep in the rocking chair. The fire was low, and in that half-dream, half-conscious space, she found herself standing not in her house, but in the spiral chamber again, only this time it was empty. No symbols, no black stone, no walls, just her floating inside a spiral of silence. The spiral spoke not in words, but in feeling curiosity, confusion, hunger, reverence. It wanted to know what it meant to be, not to imitate, to be, and it was asking her how. She felt no fear. She sang one final time, not a song, but a breath, a sound without shape, an invitation without surrender. And the spiral folded itself around her like wind through tall grass, quiet, eternal, unknowable. And then it was gone. When she woke, the fire had gone out. The house was still. The air smelled of rosemary and wet leaves. And for the first time in what felt like centuries, the spiral was completely silent. Not absent, but resting, as if finally it had been given something it never knew it wanted. A name, a shape, a witness. Spring arrived like breath returning after a long-held silence. The fields outside softened under sunlit mornings. Wildflowers pushed through earth where the frost had receded delicate bursts of yellow and blue between the dark soil's memory. In the house, the rhythm of life resumed, not the same, never the same, but steady. The boys played in the yard again. Betsy laughed in bursts now like small thunderclaps. Her drawings shifted, less spirals, more roots, rivers, trees, constellations that seemed to connect in secret ways only she understood. The nightmares had ebbed, replaced by strange dreams of movement, rivers curling through hills, vines twisting up walls, voices whispering names into wind. She told Lucy one morning that she no longer felt watched. She felt accompanied. Lucy didn't ask what that meant. She simply nodded. The house creaked differently now. Less groaning, more like stretching. The wood had soaked in the songs, the fear, the final act of communion, and now it remembered them. Sometimes at night, Lucy would sit in the hallway and hear soft humming. Not voices, not her own, just sound. A language made of the echoes of things passed down and never spoken aloud. And she began to believe something impossible, that the spiral hadn't been banished. It had been woven in, not as an invader, but as a pattern now shared. She found herself returning to the basement, not in fear, but in ritual. The salt lines remained undisturbed. The burnt herbs in corners still clung faintly to the air. She knelt once, placed her palm flat to the cold floor, and felt nothing unnatural. Only depth. Only distance. But inside that depth, stillness. Like a mountain beneath her sleeping. Sometimes in the quietest moments she imagined the spiral was growing in another way now, not deeper, but outward, into her children. Not to control, but to learn, to mimic less, to be more. The picture Betsy had drawn, the one with the tree growing where the spiral had once been hung on the fridge. Lucy added a magnet shaped like a star to hold it in place. The leaves on the tree had multiplied. Now 5, maybe 6. Maybe they'd always been that many, and she just hadn't looked close enough. One morning, as sunlight filled the kitchen in slanted gold, Betsy approached her with a question. "Do you think we were supposed to find it?" Lucy paused, brushing crumbs into her hand. "No," she said finally. "But I think it was always going to find someone." "Why us?" "Because we listened." Betsy nodded, as if she already knew. Then she walked out the door barefoot in the morning dew and stood in the middle of the yard. She raised her arms, not in worship, not in fear, but like someone greeting an old friend. Her hair caught the wind, and for a heartbeat, Lucy saw it. Not a spiral, not a shadow, but a shimmer in the air around her child, subtle and wide, like an echo of something not quite here, but no longer entirely gone. And Lucy smiled, because they had survived, because they had changed, because the spiral, for all its unknowable purpose, had left them not broken but deepened, not haunted but aware. It never really needed to take them. It just needed to be heard. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. You're safe. The spiral is quiet now, resting somewhere beyond reach, behind the veil of waking thoughts. As your eyes grow heavier and your breath settles into a gentle rhythm, know that everything strange and dark and uncertain that passed through the house has moved on. It's learned what it came to learn. You've witnessed its arc not as an enemy, but as a question that begged not to be answered, but understood. The spiral came to Lucy's family as chaos, but in their fear, in their songs, in their refusal to forget who they were, it found something else. Not victory, not defeat, but recognition. The kind of peace that doesn't erase darkness. It embraces it, holds it like a story passed from one dream to another. And now it passes into yours. Let your mind drift. Feel the weight of the blankets, the soft pulse behind your temples. Let the shadows in your room stretch long and gentle. Nothing will rise. Nothing will reach. Tonight the spiral sleeps, and so can you. You are not alone. You are never alone. Not in fear, not in wonder, not in sleep. Good night, dear listener.